George Edward Wahlen. United States Navy, World War II. George served as a corpsman, a Navy corpsman with the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines. He was attached to the 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima and was with the Marines during the 36-day onslaught in 1945. Tremendous story from this man. He is one of my Medal of Honor recipients. So George, we salute you. He's been gone for a number of years now, but his story lives on through this documentary series. And I'd like to thank Alex Woolbrandt. Alex, thank you, sir, for sponsoring this story, sponsoring George's story, making it available for many people to hear and to see. God bless you, sir. And I thank you for your continued support of my work. So if you'd like to support one of these stories, folks, or donate to my work, please, there's information in the video description and in the comments section. So, George Wahlen, he's gone but not forgotten. I'm happy to present his entire interview that I did with him on December 31st, 2004 in Roy, Utah. So please share this video with a friend, family member, another veteran. Let's keep this thing going, folks. Share it, subscribe to the channel, and I thank you for watching. God bless you.
Fifth Marine Division.
Okay, so you were with the 5th Marines, and you landed on February 19th on Iwo Jima?
Right.
Can you go back and remember what it was like the night before you landed, and tell me where you were, and maybe what your thoughts were that night before?
Well, I was aboard ship, and we had been getting, our platoon leader had been giving us briefings for about a week or 10 days, what to expect. So the night before, of course, we was all a little bit concerned, but and then we wasn't due to go in on the first landing, so we was aboard ship till we got word about noon that we was gonna go in, I think, the 2nd or 3rd wave.
What did they tell you about Iwo Jima? I mean, I heard some guys say they thought it was going to be a 3-day operation and then they're out of there. We've been bombing the island for 72 days. I mean, did you think it was going to be a pretty easy operation?
Yeah, they pretty much thought that it was going to be an easy operation. They didn't realize how badly, I guess, the Japanese were dug in and their emplacements.
Now, what was your rank at that time?
I was a pharmacist mate, 2nd class, which was a grade E5.
Okay, now was that a Navy position or a Marine?
It was a Navy position. The Marines don't have any medics. The Navy furnishes them, that's why.
So you were a medic?
I was a medic.
Okay, so corpsman, medic? Okay.
Corpsman, yeah.
Okay, you were attached to the 5th then?
I was attached to 5th Marines, yeah.
So you were with the Navy, but you were attached to the 5th?
Yes, okay. It's like being a Marine. We lived with them and everything.
Did you guys have any type of insignia that identified you as a corpsman?
No, we did not. In fact, the motto at that time in the Pacific was, don't look like a corpsman, look as much like a Marine as you can, and the officers didn't ever wear any rank, or the NCOs took their stripes off, so they couldn't spot them as far as being leaders.
Can you tell me about your ride into shore that day, and were you on a Higgins boat?
Yeah.
Okay, did you go down the rope nets?
Yes, we did.
Can you just tell me what you remember about getting into the boats and maybe the ride into shore that day?
Well, we'd done this many times before in practice and training, so that wasn't any particular big thing. But I remember we got out off Iwo there and we was circling around. And I remember everybody was up looking to see what was going on, and all of a sudden shell hit close to our Higgins boat and threw water all over us. And from then on, everybody kind of hunkered down, and which wasn't so noticeable, at least looking over.
Were there other boats maybe being blown out of the water? Did you see any of that, or is it just close calls like that?
Where I was particularly at, I didn't see any, but when we got ashore, there were ones that had been blown up and hit and stuff.
So now, you have a weapon, right? Even though you're a corpsman, did you have a weapon?
Yes, I had a 45 pistol and also a carbine. And
had you been in combat before?
no, this is my first time.
So what are your thoughts? I mean, are you looking around the Higgins boat and going, some of these guys, I may be ministering first aid pretty soon, or they may get killed? I mean, what are your thoughts going into shore?
Our thoughts were that, and we'd talked about that in our training, everything, what was expected, and we'd gone through the procedure of people designated as being wounded, so we'd taken care of them in training. So, but the thoughts were, you didn't know how many of these people certainly was going to be alive or going to make it, and that was a concern, because being served with the Marines for a whole year, and you get pretty close to people, and that was a concern, yes.
Were they firing on you when you came in at that time, or had they started firing, the Japanese? I mean, I heard that they let the first wave or two in, and then the beach got real congested, and then they opened up fire. Were you before that or after that?
After that time.
So when you came in, it was a hot area, they were shooting at you and the whole bit.
Well, it's kind of weird when we went in and landed, and everybody hit the ground, laying down, and I was not too far from the lieutenant and my platoon leader, and one of the Marines who was a runner crawled over to him and said he lost his rifle, and he says, "Well, there's plenty of dead around here, go find one." And so he crawled over to a dead Marine and turned him over, and he'd been hit right between the eyes, and his face all covered with blood, and of course he turned kind of white and shocked, and it kind of turned me the same way, because this is for real, we'd done this for a year, but this was real, and so the reality of the thing pretty much hit, and this is for real.
Was it hard for you to focus? Okay, that leads me to, of course, you've been asked before, but just the brutality of that landing or that battle. I mean, can you tell me about landing on the beach? Did they drop the ramp and the guys ran out? Were you in the front of the boat, the back of the boat, and then were guys getting shot coming out of the boat?
Actually, none of the people out of my boat were shot right at that time. I think I think what they were doing, the Japanese would wait till they got a lot on the beach and then open up with all their firepower. So this was not particularly a time that they did this. They'd done it earlier, and the reason for a lot of the casualties.
In your mind, again, I'm sure you've been asked and you've thought about it, but for my sake, it's like you're a corpsman, you're in combat. I mean, at what point did you start helping people? I mean, were you given orders to go somewhere? Were you on your own? Or tell me about the first casualties you came upon.
Well, we moved up near the center of the island, and I remember that night. It was kind of like daylight because the flares all going up, and the tracers were going into Mount Suribachi, and I remember laying in this big shell hole and and watching this, and finally about 2 or so in the morning I fell asleep. And after I'd fell asleep a little while, something hit my hole. A sizzling noise, and I thought it was a grenade or something, and I got up and tried to feel around to see if I couldn't find anything. The next morning I found it was a big piece of shrapnel that had hit right close to me. So that's kind of my first experience. And so the next day we went over on the other side of the island, and my my platoon leader had all the platoon in a circular defense. He was around checking on them, see how they were. And the Japanese come out of a tunnel and shot him right in the chest. And I got up to him with this almost immediately, and he was hit right in the chest, and he was about half conscious, and I couldn't even put a bandage on him because there's no bleeding got him evacuated right away, and later he died. So that was the first casualty I'd seen.
How did it? Now, when you landed, though, weren't there a lot of casualties on the beach?
Yeah, just dead people laying there. Yeah.
What do you remember about that? And were you able to help anybody then?
No, they were all dead that were there. The ones that had been wounded had been evacuated, I guess.
How do you? Can you be trained to see something like that? Did that bother you? I mean.
Well, I remember aboard ship when the lieutenant was giving us a briefing. The thought came through my mind, because as a corpsman, when people get wounded, the Marines can look for cover, but you as a corpsman were required to go out and take care of them. And that really kind of bothered me. Am I really going to do that? And I think I was never a religious person before, but I started praying every night. I said, anybody up there that can help me, you better help me. And so anyhow, that was kind of my feelings. And surprisingly, I never did stop for not going out and seeing somebody that was wounded. And along the same story, after the lieutenant, my platoon sergeant was leading the platoon. We were starting to go north. And me as a corpsman, they used to always be at the end of the platoon, but they taught you to be in the group so that they're not spotting you. Mm-hmm. But my platoon leader, the sergeant, got hit. It actually blew him in the air. And I was up to him almost immediately and had one of his legs blown off, one of his hands partly blown off, and part of his face blown away. So I was up there immediately and got a tourniquet on his leg and bandaged his hand and his face and gave him a shot of morphine and got him evacuated right away there. Then there was stretcher bearers right there to pick him up. So that was all of a sudden there was the real thing, the trauma there. And I just done my job, I guess that's all. And that didn't seem to be a problem. Later on in the campaign, I had some real problems with people really badly. Yeah.
Well, again, from your perspective, I've talked to, riflemen, I've talked to coxswains who drove boats and so, but I've talked to only one other corpsman that was at Iwo Jima. His name is Roy Brown. I don't know if you knew Roy Brown, but other than that, this is information that I don't have. And so I'm thinking as I talk to you what it would have been like to have seen that. Did it ever get chaotic and to where, you couldn't keep up with the wounded, or you had to triage or anything like that? I mean.
Yeah, it did. I remember after taking care of the sergeant, I tried to catch up with my platoon and got up this hill and came across a Marine who had a flamethrower, and I got over close to him on the hill, and all at once two Japanese charged us. And he opened up with his flamethrower and hit both of them. Mm-hmm. And they both burned right in front of us and dropped before they got to us. And I hated the Japanese pretty bad, but that was kind of trauma even seeing that. Yeah. And then I was going on down the hill after that to try to catch up with the rest of my platoon, and I heard some guy groaning in kind of the brush off the side there, and I went over there, and he'd been hit in the stomach, and they pulled off his jacket, and the intestines just plopped out. And of course, we'd been trained to what to do with something like that. So I got a big battle dressing out and soaked it all down with my canteen water and put it on him and give him a shot of morphine and told him I'd get somebody there to take care of him. So as I got down the hill, we had a whole lot of other casualties, and there's too many to even tell you hardly about. But I worked on them for a couple of hours, I guess. And after we got them taken care of, evacuated, I thought of this guy up the hill. So I walked up the hill to see if he'd been evacuated, and he was still there. So then I was able to get a stretcher team to take him to
Were there, this is kind of a little bit off, but were there like Catholic priests or ministers around giving last rites to men around you while you're working, or was there any of that going on?
Not in the area we was at. They were just all infantrymen and corpsmen, and that's about all.
Did you, I had some people tell me that when in combat, when a soldier or Marine dies, a lot of times they call out for their mothers. Did you hear anything like that?
I don't remember anything like that.
Did you have instances where some of those guys died on the scene with you, or were they all pretty much evacuated, the ones that you dealt with?
Well, the ones I dealt with are pretty much evacuated, but some of them died on the way back and stuff. But basically all I was trained to do is give first aid, stop the bleeding, give them a shot of morphine to keep from going into shock, and then get them evacuated as soon as you can.
Did it get to a point where you just felt like you were helpless or you weren't doing any good, or did you always just feel like, you know, you can't reach everybody, but you did the best that you can? And I mean, I don't know what it's like I said.
Well, I don't remember having that experience, because everyone I helped, we got evacuated. And my closest buddy, a fellow by the name of Eddie Manjares, was a corpsman in another platoon, and I got word to go over and help in this other platoon, and when I got over there, they had 14 casualties, all in an open field. So I got out there, and we was getting fire and overhead fire and mortar fire coming in. But anyhow, I got out there and laying on my stomach, crawling around, taking care of them. And one of them was Eddie Manjares, had been hit in the stomach and the chest, and got him bandaged up and shot of morphine, and just got him one of the first ones evacuated because he's in such bad shape. But anyhow, that, and I often wonder about that until I got, apparently I was just all involved in doing my job, and after I got over that and got back to my platoon, I kind of got thinking about, man, am I still here, you know? And so, anyhow, that was one of the real tough experiences I had.
Were you being fired at? I mean, you were a target, obviously. You're out there, you know, I mean, were you scared for your life all the time, or were you just focused on your job?
Well, I primarily, I certainly was scared for my life, but I was too much focused on my job, I guess. I remembered we was on this one hill one day, and they opened up machine gun fire on us, and everybody had hit the ground, and then we got word to pull off back down the hill. But there had been 2 Marines over on my right flank that had been hit. So I crawled over to them to see if I could help them, and both of them had been killed outright. And I started to crawl away, and then something hit right beside of me. It was a grenade, and it went off. And so I cut some of that in the face, and kind of, I was about half conscious, and I reached up and felt my face, and I couldn't see out of this right eye, and could feel blood, so I lay there and put a battle dressing around my face to stop the bleeding around my eye, and started to crawl back, and then there's a Marine over on the other flank hollering for a corpsman. So I thought, well, I'll see if I can get over there to take care of him. And I started to crawl over there. Grenades were landing between me and the other Marine, so I hollered for a Marine to throw me a grenade. And so a couple lit by me, so I grabbed them and put them in my pocket and started to crawl up to where these grenades were coming from. And as I got up there, it was coming out of a big hole. So I tried to crawl over there to see if I could knock out the emplacement so I could get over to the Marine. And I got up finally close to the hole, and I tried to pull the pin out of the grenade, and the ring come off and the pin stayed in. I was getting overhead machine gun fire, and I always remember laying there, and I pulled out my K-bar knife and straightened out the pin, and then pulled it out and got over close to where this hole was. And it was a hole, about 4 feet across and about 7 or 8 feet deep. So I looked over there, and there the Japanese soldier was throwing these grenades out, and he had a tunnel that was interlocking to this hole. So I was laying there looking at him, and I could have shot him with my .45, but then I had the unarmed grenade. So and I had the pin pulled out, so I let the spoon flip out and counted to, I was going to count to 3, but I think I got to 2 and dropped it, and it went off almost immediately. So then I crawled back down to where the Marine was, and he'd had his leg all torn up, and so I got a bandage on that. He's a fellow about 200 pounds, and was still getting overhead machine gun fire. And so I said, well, let's see if we can crawl off of here. And in the pain to his leg, he moved, and apparently the bone had been broken, and he couldn't crawl. And finally a Marine crawled up with a stretcher, so we rolled him on that, and we both pulled him laying down off the hill. So
you got him off the hill?
Yeah.
Now, is what you just described to me what you received the Congressional Medal of Honor for? That incident there?
Well, a combination of a lot of them. I'd wounded the time before. That was part of the time I was wounded then. And
can you tell me that story of what the citation was for you receiving that medal?
I got one here. I could read it to you, I guess.
Just tell me what you remember, what you did that
Okay.
awarded you that medal.
Well, the fact I took care of those 14 people too, and volunteered to go do that. And then on the last day I was there, the day before the last day, I was wounded in the back. I always remember that experience. I was pulling some Marine under his armpits off a hill, and a mortar shell had hit right behind me and knocked me flat. Felt like somebody hit me in the back with a sledgehammer on. So anyhow, I, of course, left the Marine there and crawled down the hill. My right shoulder was temporarily, felt almost paralyzed, but crawled down to some Marine and in a shell hole, and had him pull off my jacket to take care of it, and he pulled it off. I always remember his comments. He said, "Oh, Doc, you're not so bad off. You just got a big hunk of flesh out of your back." And anyhow, he put a bandage on, and I stayed there then after I got up and could walk around. It's okay. And so then they wanted to evacuate me then, but I didn't want to stay with my platoon. So the next day we was making another advance north, and came across several Marines. I'd seen them in a big shell hole, and an artillery or mortar shell had hit right in that shell hole. And I was gonna go by there, but when it hit, I got a piece of shrapnel in my leg. I didn't realize it even at the time. And anyhow, it hit the ground when it hit, and so I started to crawl, get over to the shell hole, and stood up and fell down. I couldn't walk. So I looked down at my leg, and my boot had been completely torn off, and my leg was bleeding. And so anyhow, I sit down and put a battle dressing on it, and give myself a shot of morphine, and crawled over the hole. And there was one Marine there that had both his legs blown off. So I was able to get tourniquets on them, and there was the other 3 or 4 was wounded too, so I was working with them, and finally a couple of corpsmen come up to help me, and so they was bandaging the other Marines, and some guy down the hill from where I was at was hollering for a corpsman. So while I was taking care of them, I crawled down the hill and took care of this Marine who had his one leg and one arm all shot up. So took care of him and tried to get him to crawl back with me, and he couldn't crawl, so we laid there for a little while. And finally, a couple of stretcher bearers teams came up and put us both on it to take us back down. And I remember going down this, down this hill. It's kind of not too steep, but a Japanese soldier opened up with machine gun fire on us. And so they dropped me and looked for cover, and there I was out there in the open. And I crawled off the stretcher, and I was going to see if I could knock that emplacement out because I still had a grenade. And finally some Marines came along and knocked it out, and they took me on back, and that was basically the majority of the problems we'd had. There's a lot of other stories I could tell you about the wounded people that we had.
Yeah, we might get a few more. I'm thinking though, it's like, I hear what you're saying, and it's like I'm thinking, what was it really like? I mean, you mentioned the guy that had 2 legs blown off. I mean, when you come upon someone like that, what do you say to somebody? You're going to be okay? I mean, what's he saying to you? I mean, what's the conversation going on?
I just told him that I was taking care of him, and I'd do whatever I could for him. And of course, some of them get real upset, and so you just try to quiet them down and help them the best you can.
Are they all concerned like, don't let me die, don't let me die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die? I mean, how are they feeling? Are they in shock, maybe?
They're kind of, a lot of them are in shock, and of course, there are some comments. They ask, what's going to happen? Am I going to make it, Doc? Or am I going to be all right? And of course, you try to console them and at least try to get in their mind that they're going to make it.
Do you get to a point where you lose all human emotion, seeing a lot of that? I mean, it's like working as a paramedic, it's like, do you get to a point where you can't let that affect you?
Well, here again, after I'd prayed, I seemed to be really just go do it, And then I remember after we'd been pulled off the front lines for a while, and it was about the 6th or 7th or 8th day, I remember in a foxhole, and am I going to really go up there and do that again, I was concerned. I thought, it kind of went through my mind, I'm not going to go. I remember the officer got the word, okay, we're moving out. I sit there for a minute thinking I wouldn't go. I said, well, what am I going to do if I don't go? So I only remember that one incident that I had concern about.
Did it take you a while to get through all that? I mean, mentally at night or even after the war? I mean, was there a time that it was maybe nightmares or anything like that, or was it just you forgot about it all?
No, when I was back in the hospital, every night I'd have these terrible nightmares and wake up the rest of the ward screaming, and I'd remembered, so that was a real problem, and I remember I finally got my own room, so I didn't wake up the rest of the ward. And then I had those nightmares continually even after I got home. I remember one time, I have twin brothers, and we lived in a farm, and we had a double bed up in the attic and a single bed. And one night I was sleeping with the one twin, and I woke up and had him off the bed trying to kill him. From then on, I got the single bed. But anyhow, that was, so yeah, it lasted all that time, and I had him, actually, I had him up till the day I got married. I've never had another nightmare or another dream since that I can remember. So it's funny how the mind actually works and responds.
Did you talk with your other buddies, your corpsmen, about things, like a debriefing session? Did you have during all this is going on? Did you feel like you had to talk to somebody about it, or you held it all inside?
Just pretty much held it all inside. And in combat, the other corpsman was another platoon. So the one corpsman that got killed, seen him then, but I don't recall getting with any of the other corpsmen during the combat, because you stayed pretty much with your platoon. They were your buddies and your friends and your responsibility, and that's.
This might be a hard question to answer, but because you probably have already told me, but what was the hardest thing for you during that time at Iwo Jima? What was the hardest thing you remember seeing while you were there? Or the worst thing? What was the worst thing you saw?
Well, there were so many of them.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure there are. And you probably already said some of them, but.
Well, I remember one time, this is fairly early in the campaign, we had quite a few casualties, and one of these young Marines, which is a stretcher bearer guy, and this Marine the casualty was all covered with blood, and he looked at him and he says, "I can't pick him up," just the shock of it. And one of my friends, I always remember him, he pulled out his .45 and put it in his face. He says, "You either pick it up or you're dead." I looked up at him, and because this guy, I think he came in the Marines at 17, and I think he's 18 at that particular time. And we're still friends, that particular one, to see him at reunions.
Yeah. Do you go to 5th Marine Division reunions, or what do you go to?
Yeah, we try to go to those, yes.
Are you going to go to Washington, D.C. in February? Aren't they having something there?
Yeah, they are.
Are you going to go to that?
I've talked to my company commander about it, so probably will.
I've interviewed quite a few of the 5th Marines back east, too, back in the Cincinnati area, and talked to a lot of them. But did you see the flag raising on Iwo Jima?
I did. That was about the 7th or 8th day there. And
tell me what you recall about that and then actually happening.
Well, actually, what happened, we'd just been pulled back off the lines. It was kind of a rainy and misty day, and everybody was feeling kind of downhearted, and the morale was low, because of us having to pull back. And then we got word that the flag was being raised on Mount Suribachi, and we could actually see it from where I was at. And that was quite a morale booster to see, because we'd been at the base of Mount Suribachi and seen how steep it was and how it looked impossible to take. But that's kind of a morale booster, realizing the Marines had done that.
What about the island itself? What do you remember about the island? The volcanic ash, the smell? I mean, I heard it stunk, it smelled like sulfur. I mean, what do you remember about all that?
Well, it did do that, and lots of times when you dig a foxhole, the steam would come out. And but in one way, it was kind of warm when it was cold. Yeah. But anyhow, I do remember it did kind of stink. And
now, going back to that incident with the pin and having to take your knife to get that pin out, did you kill the Japanese in that bunker?
I'm sure he was dead, because it went off right at his feet. I didn't even look down to see if it was. I was mainly just interested in taking care of the Marine, and I felt sure that he had been killed.
But you had to get rid of him to help that Marine, because he was shooting down or something, machine gun?
He was throwing grenades.
Okay. Is it anything like the movies, like the John Wayne movies, or is it different in combat?
Oh, it's different, yeah.
Yeah. What do you you got the Congressional Medal of Honor. Why did you get that? What does it read? I mean, for the bravery and action, being wounded in combat, or
refusing evacuation, and I'll give you one of these before
there were a lot of things that went to that. Does somebody have to submit your name for that, or how does that work?
Actually, that's interesting. My company commander had indicated that he had not done it personally, but I guess what they did is got comments from a lot of the people, and put them all together, and it went up through the different headquarters and stuff. And initially, I'd gotten 2 Navy crosses, And then I got word that they was going to give me the Congressional Medal of Honor. And so I just assumed that it was in lieu of the 2 Navy Crosses, but I don't think they ever did cancel the 2 Navy Crosses. But
So who awarded you that? Was there a ceremony? Where did you? I'm curious. Where did you go, and who gave you that medal?
President Truman at the White House, and there were 14 of us that got it that day. There were 11 Marines and 3 Navy people. One of the Navy people was a corpsman from Okinawa. And then there was a submarine commander, Commander Street, who had got it also. So I was the first living Navy corpsman to get the Medal of Honor. And Bob Bush from Okinawa was, of course, the second one because it was a later campaign.
Was that right after the war, or the war was still going?
No, that was October the 5th, 1945. It was after the war.
So they took you to Washington, D.C., and
Yes.
you met President Truman. Was that quite a thrill?
Yeah, well, being an enlisted man, it was quite a thrill because, and all those admirals and generals and everybody else there, and I always remember President Truman. He could see that I was pretty nervous, and that was towards the end, my name being Wahlen, to get it. And so anyhow, he could see that I was nervous because I was standing there all that time seeing everybody else. And he says, "Sure glad to see a pill pusher finally made it up there." And he had been in the Army, and that was kind of a common nickname for the medics in the Army. So,
how many World War II veterans are still alive that have the Congressional Medal of Honor? Do you know?
I don't know how many World War II are still alive, but I think there's about 140 living altogether. It's from Korea and Vietnam.
There's probably not a lot of you guys left, though, you think? I know you and Waltz, and I know there's probably some more, but you consider yourself a hero?
No, not really. I just did what I had to do or supposed to do, so it's not something that I... so you don't think of that too much, except when I see people like you.
What about the cemeteries there? Some of the guys saw the cemeteries. Did you see them or walk on the island at the time they had erected a 5th Division cemetery?
No.
Okay. See,
I only lasted 13 days.
Okay. Then maybe after that.
No, I hadn't been back. I had a chance to go back, and quite a while ago. I said, I don't know whether I want to go back there or not.
Can I ask how you were going to go back? Was it a tour? Or?
Yeah, a group was having a tour back there. And
would you fly into Iwo Jima itself, you think?
well, I don't remember. I think there was a group, it's been 10, 15 years ago. They asked me if I wanted to go, so. And I think that's probably how they'd done it, just flown.
Yeah. Because I've thought about going, but I don't know how I'd get there. I mean, I guess you have to have the Japanese have that back, right?
Right.
So it'd be kind of hard to just go there. You'd have to go with a tour or something, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm kind of wondering. But can you give me a couple more stories? I mean, you've told me a lot, but you said there were so many casualties that you treated. I mean, what was maybe the hardest one? Or
let me tell you one story that just entered my mind. I was back in the shell hole, and a couple of Marines drug another Marine back. He had kind of cracked up, brought him back screaming and hollering. And so I gave him a shot of morphine and kind of slowed him down. And so after he kind of calmed down, he just kept saying to me, "Doc, don't send me back. Don't send me back." And so I said, "Well, you stay here and see what we can do." And all of a sudden I got busy taking care of the casualty, so I left him in the hole. I never did see him again. So 20 years later, we was back at a reunion, and we was all sitting in this group in my company, and giving everybody a chance to talk, and I'd talked, and anyhow, after I got through talking, this Marine come from the back of the group and come and grabbed me and started crying. He said, "Doc, I owe my life to you." And he was one of supposedly the 5 of our company that finished the campaign without being wounded or killed. So, anyhow, that's one of the things I remember. And here again, one other time, I was down this valley. This is fairly early, and taking care of casualties, and I take care of had a group of them, over a period of 2 or 3 hours, and I heard this other corpsman was in the area, so I was able to locate him and hollered at him, and I said, his name was George Long, I always remember. I said, "Come on down and help me out." And he says, "I'm not coming down there, it's dangerous." I says, "I know it is." I says, "That's why I need your help, get down here." So finally he came down, and on his way down got shot in the arm. And so anyhow, I bandaged him up, and we stayed down there and took care of more casualties for quite a while. And finally I remember we was all out of medical supplies, both of us. And I says, "George, go back to company CP and get some more medical kits." And he says, "I'm not going back." He says, "It's dangerous out there, people getting shot." He says, "You go back, you're the senior man." So I finally went back, but anyhow, he was a good friend, and he finally finished, I think he finished the campaign. No, he didn't finish the campaign. He was wounded and evacuated too, but he did join the unit later back in Hawaii.
How many, this estimate, but I mean, how many wounded do you think you treated in those 13 days? 10, 100, 500? I mean, how many?
Well,
Approximately.
I'd 25, 30, maybe 40. I don't really know. I didn't really keep track. I just tried to do what I had to do.
How are you trained for that situation? How do they train you?
Well, in our training, we go out with the Marines. We live with the Marines, and we're part of their unit. And we go out and make landings, amphibious landings, just like we did on Iwo Jima. And then they simulate casualties and what you do, and you take their tag and indicate what you've done for them. If it's just put on it, maybe a dressing. They sometimes have dressings to use, or just that sort of thing. So anyhow, but the big thing is learning to stick with them, do what they do. And I remember on one of the early hikes, we lost probably about probably the biggest part of our company. And I remember when we got up the bivouac area, they had a bonfire, finally made a bonfire, and I remember our lieutenant had even had to drop out, and he was worrying about this going to kick him out of the Marine Corps. And me as a corpsman, I was sitting there, I says, "Well, it's not the worst thing that could happen to you." But anyhow, they were all very close and tried to take care of each other.
Is there a camaraderie in combat? I mean, those guys are really close to each other.
Very close, and they look out for each other. They really do.
When you were training, did you ever think you'd be in a combat situation like you were on Iwo Jima?
Well, we never figured there could be anything like Iwo Jima. But we knew that we'd be in combat, yes.
I guess I've talked to a lot of the guys who said, you really can't imagine until you're actually in combat what it's really like.
Yeah,
To
that's,
actually be there, and I guess that's where you learn the most. I mean, there's probably no rules either. It's just
no.
do what you can.
Well, there is no rules, and the pressure is tremendous, and there are a few people who do crack into the strain, and it's understandable why they would. And remembering some of those guys that did that, and they still come to the reunion, people still accept them like they did everything they supposed to. So, but and some of the real fine people that happened to.
When you landed on the island, I mean, what did you have with you? The guys had packs. What was in your pack of medical supplies? What did you have?
Oh, we had the battle dressings, sulfa drugs, and the morphine, and that's pretty much the big part of it.
You know, in the movies, you see a corpsman giving a wounded man morphine, more than one syringe, just to kill him. I mean, because he's dying. Did that ever happen? Stuff like that, where somebody was so wounded, where it's just like, well, go ahead and give him another shot, or give him another shot, or.
It didn't happen to me, no.
You see that in the movies, so it's probably the movies that.
Yeah.
You know. But that.
But that's understandable if you really felt that.
Yeah. Did you ever see that movie Saving Private Ryan?
Yes.
Did that upset you at all, or could you relate to the beginning of that movie where they were landing on that beach and all the casualties? Was it like that?
Well.
Or was that Hollywood showing that?
Well, maybe a little more Hollywood. Ours wasn't like that. We had a lot of dead there laying there on the beach, like I told you. But when we land on the beach, here again, they just kind of let us in. I think they're just waiting for people to get in, and that's what they'd done in the earlier groups when they really got a lot on the beach. That's when they opened fire on them.
How come the Japanese would shoot corpsmen? You're not supposed to do that, are you? The Geneva Convention, aren't you? I mean, is that one reason you didn't have insignias and all that?
Yes. Well, that was the reason, because they didn't pertain to that. Apparently, that wasn't part of their.
Was there ever an instance where the Japanese were crying "Corpsman," and where they were Japanese, not Americans? Or is any kind of code that you would say?
I understood that had happened on Iwo. I didn't not involved with it.
What do you think, George, looking back on what you did in today's society? What does freedom mean to you, and the price for freedom? What does it mean to be free?
Well, I've always been that way.
Yeah.
So it's pretty important. And of course, once you're in the service, of course, you're not free because you do what they tell you to do. But and I really enjoyed the service because I got out of the Navy and enlisted in the Army and spent 20 years in the Army.
Okay.
And the Army offered me a better grade than the Navy would, so I went in the Army. And before I could get out, I had 20 years in. So
Did you go through Korea, Vietnam?
I got over in Korea. I thought I was going to Korea right at first, and then they stationed me in Japan, and I was over there in Tokyo for 3 years. And I came back, and right after the war in Korea was over with, they sent me to Korea for a year. And of course, that's quite an experience. We're still having some problems over there when we got there. And then I was eventually stationed in Hawaii, and I got orders for Vietnam. And some colonel called me and said, "George, you don't want to go, you don't have to go." And I said, "No, that's fine." And my wife says, "No, all I got to do is be pregnant." She was. So our last son was born when I was in Vietnam.
Well, you've got a nice new flag flying out there. What does the flag mean to you? What does it represent in your life? I mean, how important is that flag?
That flag is very important, and ever since we've been civilian life, we've had a flag, Maybe I better have you interview Mel better.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a lot of the veterans I've spoken with have a flag, and I'll mention what does freedom mean to you? And I guess my point is, what would you say to young people today about freedom? We take our freedoms for granted. You've been through war. I mean, what would you tell a young person about freedom?
Well, one of the things I'd tell them, we have the freedom because of all the people in the service who has been willing to go to war and risk their lives, that we still are able to maintain freedom for future generations too.
I mean, what is that flag? I mean, you see that flag blowing in the wind. It's like, it means more to you probably than the average person because of what you've gone through.
Well, it was pretty important on Iwo Jima when they raised the flag, that's for sure.
Would you do it again if you had to?
Absolutely. It'd be easier now I'm older.
Anything else you feel maybe somebody else has asked you in the past maybe would be pertinent for what I'm doing, or anything else about Iwo Jima that maybe you normally would have said but you didn't say, or anything come to mind?
No.
How long you been married?
58 years.
So what, 1946?
6.
Did you know her before the war?
No.
No?
No, met her after the war.
You mentioned you weren't a praying man, but you started praying.
Right.
How has that carried into your civilian life? Do you still feel the same way, or?
No, my wife was a member of the LDS Church, and I joined it too, and have been active ever since.
Let me ask you this question. Why do you think you survived that battle? I mean, you were wounded, but why do you think you lived through it where a lot of men were killed?
Well, my thoughts when I was there that the Lord was looking after me. And I think really that is true in many cases. And of course, there's a lot of good people who die too.
I'm going to ask you one more thing and I'll stop the camera, but at the end of my interviews, if you're comfortable, I'd like the men to give me a salute. Could you do that for me into the camera?
Out of uniform?
Well, I'm gonna, I'm asking if you're comfortable. If you're not,
yeah,
that's fine.
That's fine.
There's a purpose when you see the end of the film. I like to do this if you're comfortable with it, and it'll make sense as you would see it. But just if you could just look into the camera and just give me a salute, hold it, and then release. Whenever you're ready. Okay, that's good.